I hope this works. Please, Diosito Santo. All right. So it looks like we are live. Um, so I will start by saying, for those of you that are tuning in from Facebook Live, hello, welcome. We're going to be starting in a couple of minutes. Thank you for joining us for this first Interconnected Justice Workshop of 2021. We look forward to having you being a part of this conversation. And just stay tuned. We're going to be starting in a couple of minutes. And now we can start letting people in too. So I'll do that. Yeah, Rico, if possible, and just as I'm doing the initial presenting, as you see people come in, it'd be great if you could just let them in. Thank you. Hi, everyone. For those of you that are in the room so far, welcome, welcome. We're so happy to have you for our first Interconnected Justice Workshop on immigrant justice for 2021. We'll be starting in a couple of minutes, so take your bathroom breaks, go get some water, do what you need to do to center yourself in the space, because we're starting off with a really difficult topic, and we want to make this an opportunity for learning and exchanging and making sure we lean on each other's leadership for the work that we're talking about today. So we look forward to sharing that with the amazing speakers that we have on board, and see you in a couple minutes. For anyone that would like to share their introductions and why they wanted to join this first workshop this year, please check the chat box that you'll find at the bottom of your screen, and share with us who you are, where you are tuning in from, and let us know why you're here. Looks like we have a pretty solid set of people in so far. Just about a little over a dozen, which is great. No, Artie, we cannot hear you. We currently have people on silent so that we can sort of jump right into the presentation, but we will love to hear your voice later on in our session together. Promise. And for those of you that are tuning in right now, we've also gone live on Facebook. So if you visit our URI North America Facebook page, you can actually share that video with folks on your feed. And we're encouraging that because we want to make sure that audience grows as much as possible. We've got to make a good impression at the first go. So, good afternoon, everyone that's tuning in, or good evening, depending on where you are. My name is Tahil Sharma, and I'm the Regional Coordinator for North America for the United Religions Initiative. And we are very pleased to have you join us for this first Interconnected Justice Workshop for 2021. This was an idea, an initiative that we started up after many folks within our organization at the United Religions Initiative shared a common interest in wanting to learn about different issues and how community members can take a role in being a part of the work that comes with fighting for justice. And the opportunity to do that came from leaning into the power of our cooperation circles. For those of you that are new to URI, we are a network of chapter organizations, over 1,000 of them in 110 countries, that are doing grassroots work for justice, peace, and healing. And some of those amazing folks are going to be uplifted in the space of this work that we're doing through Interconnected Justice. So we're really excited to be able to share some important work happening and how we can tune you into the opportunity to do the work yourself. So I'm going to be sharing my screen right now with you all. So let me just take a minute to figure out my life. That. Can you all see the screen? Fantastic. All right. So the two presenters that we have today are Rico Ocampo, who's the executive director at Anytown Las Vegas, and Priyana Kalita, who is a student liaison at the Oxford Interfaith Center of Miami University. These are two folks who are doing some amazing work on the ground, focused on storytelling and advocacy for immigrant communities, and they'll be sharing some important details about what that work looks like. But before we begin, I'm going to be sharing some important information about the current situation of immigration in a country like the United States. Because as complicated as the system has been for the past several decades, and particularly with the transition of administrations, we seem to find ourselves in a lot of different pots when it comes to taking the wrong steps in helping immigrant communities. This first slide is a breakdown of the immigrant population in the United States. It is estimated that around 45 million people make up the US population that happen to be of immigrant descent. These percentages are broken down into folks that are here as lawful immigrants, people who have become naturalized citizens or who might have permanent residence. You have folks that are considered temporary lawful residents who have temporary personal stays, and you have folks who are considered unauthorized, who are a breakdown of a mix of different qualifying factors, people who might have DACA or who are undocumented in general, people who have temporary stays, or folks who are not a part of the system and have to really stay low. These numbers can also be very iffy. They're not specific because some of the numbers of undocumented folks remains unknown. So a lot of the numbers that you might hear are based on estimates. Some of the numbers that we have of folks that are a part of the immigration system include around 700,000 folks who are DACA recipients as of 2018. And that number may vary because of the changes within the Trump administration, especially going into 2021. According to the Department of Homeland Security, when we started the refugee program and system in the United States, we have since then accepted 3.7 million people as refugees and asylum seekers. And in 2019, with shifts in the quotas in the number of refugees and asylum seekers that we had, approximately 29,916 refugees came in 2019. According to the National Immigration Forum, temporary stays are allowed to over 400 foreign nationals from countries like Honduras, Panama, El Salvador, Guatemala, among Nepal, and many others from around the world. In the context of what we've focused on in the immigration system, one of the really important things that are highlighted are the number of deportations that have taken place. Historically, that number has significantly increased over time, as you can see from this graph from the Pew Research Center. Starting in the year 2000, where an estimated 188,000 people were deported from the United States. That number sharply rose with the development of ICE and CBP, which are the systems that are created to handle issues at the border and are the main enforcing agencies for deportations. Through the Bush Jr. and Obama administrations, the number sharply increased to a high of 432,000 deportations. That number then sharply decreased towards the end of the Obama administration and began going up again as of the Trump administration. As recently as 2020, the recent numbers that we have from the Department of Homeland Security is that 168,000 people were actually deported in the year 2020 during a global pandemic. And that is speaking volumes about the urgency that is seen behind deportations, but also more importantly, the priorities of the previous administration. But we have now entered a new presidency with President Biden being at the helm of leadership. And there are a couple of promises that were made that we're still trying to figure out and wrap our minds around. First and foremost, we have a commitment to comprehensive immigration reform that has now been presented as the US Citizenship Act of 2021. President Biden and a number of experts came together to try to better create a process for folks who wanted to become permanent residents and citizens. And there are a lot of different parameters that are being created around that. This piece of legislation has been introduced to in Congress. We are seeing a significant uphill battle with what that's going to look like because a lot of the commitments that are being made because of this legislation don't have a consensus in the House and the Senate. The second priority that was pushed by the Biden administration was zero deportations in the first 100 days of presidency. There was a general stop to deportations that were done, but some exceptions were actually made to still deport people. So unfortunately, one of the promises of not deporting people has been broken. The estimated number is very iffy based on some of the estimations from major immigrants' rights groups. A number had been going around that approximately 26,000 people have already been deported in these first 100 days. That number is not necessarily based on truth, based on a report from Politico that's been doing a lot of fact checking. Those numbers are based on sort of estimates and generalizations that are sort of wrapped up together. So that number is sort of figurative. Since we can't know exactly the per day basis of the number of people that are being deported, unfortunately, it's hard to determine where we're statistically at. I know I've presented a lot of information to all of you about a really complicated system. And the question you're going to keep asking yourself is what role we play in this work. That's where we have our speakers come in, because they play a really important role about looking at grassroots interfaith work and grassroots advocacy work in our approach to being able to fight for justice. It's an opportunity for us to look at the ways that people, through stories, solidarity, and through substantial accountability work, are able to hold governing bodies accountable for the ways that they run immigration systems. Our first speaker is going to be Priyana Kalita. She has she and they pronouns. She serves as a student liaison at Oxford Interfaith Center for Miami University in Ohio. She's a student athlete from India who plays women's tennis. She double majors in sports leadership and management with a concentration in coaching and women, gender, and sexuality studies. She was inducted in the Theta Alpha Kappa National Society for Religion and Theology Studies for her work with the trans community in sex work in India last year. When researching the topic, she got to learn about things related to Buddhism and Hinduism, specifically which cultivated a desire to learn more about various other religions and religious practices. Our second speaker is Rico Ocampo, whose pronouns are he and him. He's the executive director of Anytown Las Vegas in Nevada. He was born in Zacatepetl, Mexico, and immigrated to the United States in 1992. He's an undocumented, documented community member and activist. He's engaged in local, statewide, and national advocacy efforts to advance systemic change for homeless youth, immigrant communities, and underrepresented youth of color. He currently serves as the director for Anytown Las Vegas, the longest-running anti-racist youth program in the state of Nevada. He also serves as the youth organizer for Make the Road Nevada, a nonprofit organization that works with Latinx and working class communities of color through policy innovation and transformative education. And he also serves as the treasurer and member of the Leadership Council for United Religions Initiative in North America. So with those introductions, I'd like to turn it over to our first speaker, Priyana, please.
Thank you so much for the introduction, and I'm really glad that I got the opportunity to speak today. Thank you so much for everyone for being here. As Tahil said, I'm Priyana Kalita, I use she, their pronouns. I'm currently a student athlete at Miami University. I was a former intern for the Interfaith Center at Miami University. During my time there, I came up with my own web series known as the Divergent Immigrant Experiences web series, in order to give the immigrant community a place to express their voices, seeing and experiencing the injustice which was happening to the immigrant community during the ongoing global pandemic. So during this pandemic, one feeling that I've been relating to a lot is the feeling of being unwanted. For sure, no one should feel unwanted anywhere. And, everyone deserves to live their life according to however they want to. But in order to explain more about it, I'll have to take everyone through a quick journey of where I come from and my life. So if everyone's ready for that, can I get a thumbs up? Okay. So I was born in a very small town, but mighty town known as Guwahati in the state of Assam in India. I am from the northeastern part of India. We are famous for tea and the one-horn rhino. Growing up, I was the first girl child from the paternal side of my family. As what my mom says, my family was really happy when I was born. But some of the concerns that my family had were I was too much like a boy. I dressed like a boy. I preferred shorts over skirts, t-shirts over tops. Another concern that my family had was I was a bit darker than they had expected. So they did a lot of things to get myself a bit lighter in complexion wise. They put ice on my face, they put cucumber on my face, facial creams, whatever, to just get me a bit fairer. But luckily that those times have passed, and I've passed those times. Very lucky about that. Fun fact is that when I got this piercing last summer, my family was really happy because, at least she got one ear pierced. Hopefully she'll get the other one pierced soon and she'll be more feminine and they'll be more happy, right? So for sure, these are, funny instances which I've grown up with, but these are some of the things which have made me feel unwanted or something like wrong, my existence of being wrong, somewhat like that. But regardless, when I was back home, I loved playing. But another concern was that, when the street I lived on, the girls on my street were not allowed to play with the boys. I was the only exception because if I was not allowed to play, I would scream and make a scene, and my mom would rather have me outside than inside of the house. So, so my grandmom for sure was really not that happy about it, because, why should my granddaughter be an exception because other girls are not playing with the boys, right? So, I mean, those times passed and there was a lot of drama in the family because of me. Teachers at school told me that I walked too much like a man. I had too much like a manly aura about me. I was still 6 or 7 years old. I was just confused as a kid, I guess. But um, my mom saw everything happening, and she decided that, you know what, I'll put you in a regulated environment. So she put me in singing, dancing, and art classes. So I started going there, and I went there, but I wasn't that fond of it. The only thing I was fond of was playing. I was not even that great at school, right? I loved playing anything all day I could play. So in the end, my mom and my dad, they decided to put me in tennis, because the tennis club was just 5 to 10 minutes walk from where I lived. And my mother also wanted me in a regulated environment. She wanted me to learn manners and just not waste my time in front of the TV. She wanted me to learn something, wanted me to be something better. She also wanted me to go somewhere near the house, because during the 2008, when I started playing tennis, Guwahati was experiencing a lot of bomb blasts and a lot of curfews, with the biggest and the most devastating bomb blast happening on the 30th of October in 2008, which killed 100 plus people and left 400 plus people injured. That was a devastating thing. We were under curfew for a long time that time. So my mother wanted me to be around near the house somewhere. So things started, taking place. I started playing tennis, and I realized that I actually liked tennis. That was a miraculous thing. My family was like, "Oh, finally, she's going somewhere. She'll be somewhere, meet people, whatever." But then what happened was, as I started playing tennis again, that the feeling of being unwanted or something wrong struck me, because as we were growing up, I'm growing up with my friends, boys, girls. Girls started wearing skirts, they started wearing tops, and I stuck with shirts and shorts, because the first thing is that I needed to be comfortable, right? But then that struck again. I felt out of place and everything. And again, my family came into the place. They tried to make me wear skirts and tops. I couldn't. I tried wearing skirts for sure. There were a couple of days, but I just couldn't concentrate in playing tennis because I was just so uncomfortable in wearing skirts. But again, those were tough times for sure. As a kid, I feel like that's the reason why I have a very strong mental. I'm very strong mentally. Is that I can convince myself to just suck it up and get through stuff, and that's what I learned from when I was like 5, 6 years old. Just block it out and just keep going. Started playing tennis. Actually, started doing well. I was state number one. I was top. I was within the top 12 tennis players in the country when I was 14 or 15 years old. But then what was next? What was I going to do with tennis? Because, my family and my parents saw that my friends were leaving tennis because their 10th grade board exams came in, and 10th grade board exams are a big thing in India. You just have to do well in that and everything. But I told my parents that, see, do you think I'm better in studies than tennis? The answer is clearly no, right? So why don't you just let me play tennis and I'll just do something about it with it. So during that time, around 8th to 9th grade, around 10th grade, I got to know about college sports in the US, that, you get scholarships if you do well, right? So I told my parents that, see, this is something I can do. I'm good in tennis, so I can do something. I'll get the grades, if I can do something with it. Because one thing was that I wanted my family to be free of me, because I know that they were going through so many financial circumstances because of tennis, that I just wanted them to be, I'll get a scholarship and you will be proud of me, whatever. But then, when you think, for a girl from Guwahati, going to the US, it seems more than a dream. My father told me that, dream, but look at our status. We are almost lower middle class and we cannot afford that. You just cannot think that you'll be able to do it. But I told my mom that, see, I know I can do it. I know this is possible. I can do this. And then another obstacle which came up after that was coaching fees. I needed advanced coaching. Guwahati, Assam didn't have many players to practice with me anymore. I was very frustrated because, my family wasn't able to afford advanced coaching for me to do well in tournaments. But, as days passed, my father and my family put all their earnings in my tennis coaching and sent me to Delhi, one of the high performance tennis academies in Delhi. I had to go there alone. My family couldn't come with me because we just didn't have the money for us to move with myself. I was just the only person. I had to find an apartment, which, went hand in hand with the budget that my father had told me about. My parents used to visit me in turns, but not permanently because, my mom had to take care of my family and my little brother, and my father was working. Um, but one of the good things was that the head coach of the academy understood my situation and uh, allowed me to attend the academy in a lower cost. And I also started working as practice partners with students there so that I could practice more and without any cost. So I started working and hustling through when I was 15, 16 years old. And then, my father told me that I have enough funds to send you to around 8 to 9 tournaments in Asia. I remember first time we went to Sri Lanka and my dad, I performed terribly. I put my dad into so much pressure after that because, we just have so little funds, and we are in this race to get this scholarship in the US. And I'm still ranked around 2000 in the world, and I had to get into top 500 to get an offer. Um, but then I told my dad that, see, I know this will hurt you, but you put a lot of pressure on me, and I'm just 15 years old. So how about you just send me a loan to country so that we can save money for an entire person? That was tough, but then my father said okay to it, and I traveled to 8 countries around Asia alone, playing tournaments, and then uh, playing tournaments, and then luckily I uh, got the ranking of around 490 in the world from around 3000, which was a mountain to climb when I first started, but then I made it happened. But then what happened was my transcripts weren't getting approved by the center which approves college tennis or college sports transcripts here in the US. It was not of the American standard according to them. So that was another obstacle which was delaying my visa. I was very sad and everything. And then after a long time, I reached the US before 2 days of the start of classes of fall 2017, just because my transcripts were not according to American standard and my visa was getting delayed because of it. Um, when I came to Miami, I thought things would get easier, but then, I would get asked, why is my accent so funny? I would get asked to repeat myself in class. I would get misgendered. That's another thing I face on a regular basis here. I've been told to go out from women's bathrooms because, some people think that I just use the wrong bathroom. So, things just got worse when I came here. I thought that, things would get better, but things got worse. um, and then, during this pandemic, I realized that these things in a broader picture led to the policies such as delay of work visas in last year in 2020, delay in refugee status for asylum seekers, and in the month of July, there was this rule which came from the former administration, which said that international students having F1 status have to vacate this country in 10 days if their classes were to go online during this pandemic. So mind this, that everything is happening during a pandemic. Like the dream that so many immigrants like myself have is getting crushed in front of us during a global pandemic. So the feeling of being unwanted is not something anyone should feel, as I said. And as everyone must have noticed, I've been talking about unwanted throughout, however, I've been speaking. Um, Surely this is unacceptable as us immigrants come to this country with the hope of a better life and better opportunities. We don't come here to steal anyone's jobs, as we are always under the pressure of this ticking time bomb known as our visa or the temporary authorization. Um, you know, uh, I am personally on F1 visa, and I was given just 4 years to make the most of my stay in the US. Some people are given even less according to visa regulations. And for us immigrants, international students, if we have to work off campus, we need to go through a curricular practical training authorization or optional practical training authorization. So CPT, which is curricular practical training authorization, you can only work a job or an internship if it relates to your major. And you have to take the appropriate course load for CPT. You cannot work anything other than that. OPT, on the other hand, is for people who have graduated or are looking for jobs, but it also comes with an additional $400+ application fee with it, without the confirmation of you getting the authorization in. So I would like to end by urging people to do their research thoroughly before commenting anything on immigrant community in this country or immigrants around the world. Because we are immigrants, we don't choose to leave our families back home for fun or just to explore options. We leave our families and miss milestones such as birthdays of family members, brothers and sisters growing up, parents turning old and their hair graying, etc., just to secure a better future for ourselves and our family back home. We move across the world with the hope to live and to make ourselves, our future better, and to live the American dream, which promotes and promises opportunities and prosperity. Then why does this notion of us being not needed or unwanted still exist? Why doesn't the American dream still doesn't include us or people who look like us? Think about it. Thank you.
Priyana, thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that personal experience with us. I think oftentimes when people are looking at the, monstrosity that is these big systems, they tend to lose out on the opportunity to hear the personal stories of all of the millions of individuals that are impacted by legislation, by executive action, by the opportunities of folks that have the privileges to um, being here as permanent residents and citizens comfortably, in realizing that it's a lot more complicated than that. Getting to hear your experience first in Assam, going to Delhi, doing this amazing work you were doing in sports, and then coming here to study, um, is a journey that many people have to experience in a lot of different ways that are complicated and challenging. And it's important for people to hear your voice, to be able to hear the voice of others, in making sure we can better contextualize and adapt a system that should be just, that should be compassionate, and should be welcoming to the promise of a better tomorrow. So thank you for sharing those first few words about yourself. And we look forward to hearing more about the work that you're doing at Miami University. But now I'd like to shift it over to my dear colleague Rico, who's going to be sharing his work at Anytown Las Vegas and his experience. Rico?
Thank you, Tahil. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here with everyone. I have a presentation that I'd like to present to you all. Give me 1 second. All right, so before I begin, and before I allow any other words to leave my mouth, I want to respectfully acknowledge the indigenous people that who have stewarded the land I am on for time and immemorial. And I'm currently in Las Vegas, Nevada, for those of you that are wondering where I'm at, the land of the Nuwuvi people, Southern Paiute people. It is important for me to recognize the indigenous people that are still here. And it's important for me to also recognize, and for everyone to recognize, that indigenous people still exist and they're thriving and they're here, and to not treat them as a relic of the past. In addition to that, I want to acknowledge the movement for Black Lives. I have the privilege of working with young people, and one of the vows that I've made to the Black youth that I serve is that in every space that I have the opportunity to present at, I was going to utter these words. And that is not only acknowledging the movement for Black lives, and not only Black men, but also Black women, trans, queer, and gender non-conforming people. And that is something that I wanted to make sure I did before my presentation. Thank you all so much for not only being on this call, for those of you that are tuning in on Facebook Live and throughout the world. My name is Rico Ocampo. I am from Zacatepec, Mexico. I am an undocumented and documented community organizer. And the root of my existence is really built on compassion. I am one of over 800,000 individuals who benefit from DACA in the United States. And I am one of 800,000 individuals who was brought into this country. I was brought at the age of 3. But what I will not do in this presentation is I will not throw my parents under the bus. I will not be upset at my parents for the decisions that they made. And in fact, I will celebrate both my mother and my father for acting on their love, for acting on what they thought was necessary so that we, myself, and the rest of my siblings could thrive. And when I look at the history of how my parents immigrated to the United States, I am both in awe, but I'm also in disbelief at the amount of love they had for us and the amount of commitment that they had, knowing that they had no resources, but yet I am here speaking to you. And the reason why I say my story is rooted in compassion because my family, my mother had to travel over 2,000 miles just to make it to the border. And upon their travels, they encountered situations where they were met with acts of compassion. And one of those was me being 2 years old, my other siblings being younger. Imagine walking into the desert, walking thousands and thousands of miles, and you run out of water. And that's one of the things that my parents experienced upon entering this country. And when they met another group, this other group handed my mother a gallon of water. And that was what got us through the next phase of our journey. And upon entering San Diego, my mother walked so much that her sandals had ripped and had arrived into the United States barefoot. And the first thing that she was greeted with was a meal from someone living in the United States. And so these acts of compassion really are a foundation for myself, for my family. And I want to use this as a way to explain this presentation. I have the privilege of being the director for Anytown Las Vegas, a youth organization that is empowering the next leaders of today. And I intentionally say today because we need to treat young people as the people who are going to catapult us to higher levels. And so I wanted to put together a presentation that talks about what people can do beyond protesting. And so if you're asking yourself, who is Anytown? Anytown Las Vegas is a grassroots program with a 37-year history and the longest running anti-racist youth program in the state of Nevada. And since 1983, over 4,000 students have graduated from the program. Now think about that, that's 4,000 people who have gone through an anti-racist program and have left the program, graduated, and now are community members in our program. And this is a picture of some of those youth. And one of the reasons why Anytown is so special is because we applied what is known the contact theory, which is the idea that people can reduce personal bias through cross-cultural experiences. The American psychologist Gordon Allport hypothesized that prejudice emerges from a lack of understanding and exposure to different people, and it is rooted in our societal segregation. And what essentially this means, and what it meant for me when I attended this program, is I met the first refugee in my life when I attended Anytown. I met the first Muslim person when I attended Anytown. I met the first asylum seeker when someone who was approved by asylum when I attended this youth program. I met the first Indian person when I attended Anytown Las Vegas. And what it did is it immersed me into a whole different world that I didn't know existed. And so what do? At Anytown, students learn about racism, racial and religious prejudice, diversity. They learn about social justice in a non-conventional way that takes lectures and study groups out of the equation and replaces them with a hands-on approach that prioritizes group discussions, interactive workshops, and youth-led campaigns. And our very own program is led by youth leaders. It's led by a council of 11 young people who view not only Anytown as the breakthrough for them and their lives, but also see Anytown as the community, the ideal community that should be built. And so this right here is a picture, an example of what we do with in our programs. Is we introduce students to presentations, to campaigns, to topics that they wouldn't have had the opportunity to learn. And so for us, we really take youth leadership as one of the main drivers to ensure that people are not only culturally competent, but that they're also informed of what it truly means to be, for example, an undocumented person, what it means to be a Muslim student in Las Vegas, Nevada during these times. And so we bring those issues to the forefront. And one of the things that I want to talk about is a little bit more about the grassroots organizing aspect of it. By nature, I'm a grassroots organizer. I'm an activist. I am someone who loves to connect with people and build community. And one of the ways in which we do it is through this 5-point plan. We plot, we plan, we organize, we strategize, and we mobilize. And so this right here really is a blueprint for us when we want to address a specific issue happening within our community. We address it by implementing these 5-point plans. And I'll give you an example, and I'll make sure to share this link here in a bit. But I want to talk about one of our youth leaders whose name's Josie. He wanted to talk about the usage of the word illegal and how many people didn't understand the history behind it. And so when we plotted how are we going to address this issue to ensure that not only we're educating people on the history, but we're also informing people on alternative words to use when referring to people with no status. So we put together a podcast, we organized, we reached out to directly affected people. He led the podcast with no experience, no resources, but we did it anyway. And then we strategized what is the next step? We got the interviews, we have this done. How do we do that? And now we're putting together a full podcast program for the Anytown Las Vegas organization. And so when we think about ways to organize, we think about reaching out directly and also relational organizing. I want to talk a lot about this later on in our Q&A piece, but I put together 10 action steps that people can take to be a part of this interconnected justice, because after all, this workshop is called Interconnected Justice. How are we all connected? How can we all find a way to ensure that the lives of immigrants are just as equal as the ones who are non-immigrants? And so these action steps, really, I want everyone to think about how you can show up during these action steps. And so I created 10 of these. For me, the first one, and they're no priority, but for me, centering the needs of those directly affected is a critical piece when addressing issues affecting immigrants, or in this case, it'd be immigrants who've had either some sort of experience with having visas, or immigrants who are undocumented, people who have DACA. For far too long, I've been a part of panels, I've been a part of workshops and sessions where you have people who are PhD graduates, people who are experts in the field of immigration, but yet they've never felt the stinging darts of what it feels to be an immigrant in this country. And so the real experts when it comes to immigration are Priyana and me in this situation. And I'm saying Priyana and me because I don't know the status of anyone else in this room, but I do know the status of me and Priyana. And if we're going to talk about immigration and how it affects people, the voices of those directly affected have to be at the forefront. And yes, we need people who can talk about policy, and we need people that can talk about how it shows up in the healthcare system and how it shows up in other sectors. But when you don't have the people that are directly affected by it, you're not really capturing the real story of what it means to be an undocumented immigrant, what it means to have an F1 visa. The other action step is diversifying your language, understanding that the way in which we speak about immigrants is crucial. And you'll see how crucial it is when I get to the last step of this piece. I look at this in two different lenses. I look at this as increasing your knowledge, opening a book, and understanding what the word refugee means, the difference between an asylum seeker, the difference between an undocumented person, F1 holder, someone who has DACA, someone who has no status at all, someone who has TPS, temporary protected status. These are all words that we need to understand and need to know how to we need to know the definition between these words. The other lens that I look at this is how can we ensure that we're not pulling language from the white supremacist dictionary and calling immigrants invaders and people who are coming in and taking over this country. I'll make a point at the end, like I mentioned, about why that is so critical. Next piece is uplifting Black immigrants. For far too long, again, Black people, African-American people in the United States are not only hyper-policed, but they're also falling victims to state violence at higher rates than any other racial group in the US. And that also shows up in the immigrant conversation. Over 600,000 undocumented Black immigrants live in the US, but yet the media does not show that. And so we as people, as allies, as folks who want to uplift the narrative of what it means to be an immigrant, we have to ensure that Black people are part of those conversations as well. Black people from Belize, from Haiti, from countries in the Caribbean, from continents like Africa. These people are important parts of this immigrant conversation as well. And so one of the things that we have to ensure is that when we talk about immigration, is not solely a Latinx issue, is not solely an issue of Mexican people. And that is a critical piece for us to understand. Another piece is, if you're in this room, if you're listening to this live right now, and you don't understand what immigration is, or you have your doubts about how immigration shows up in your community, or maybe you have concerns about immigration, I'm going to implore that you listen to this entire conversation before you cast the first stone. And the reason why I say that is because we listen to one channel for too long and not listen to the other channel that is giving off the other piece of information. And so I implore you to listen, to understand, not to respond. I understand that when you hear something, a statistic, a story, if you either disagree with how immigration is showing up or the policies and how they're showing up in the United States, listen to this piece first. And in fact, I would say take a couple minutes and reflect on what you just heard from myself and Priyana. Listen to the Q&A that we're going to have and understand where you can come and meet someone with dialogue. The other privilege is got privilege. So if you're a person who is not affected by immigration, this is going to be one thing where we really need y'all to show up. We need you to really use your privilege and use it in action. And what I mean by this is it's easy for Ellen DeGeneres to put on a DACA shirt and says, I support dreamers, I'm a dreamer. It's easy for her to do that. But the moment she takes it off, she's no longer a DACA dreamer. That's the difference between me and Ellen DeGeneres. And I love Ellen, don't get me wrong, right? Ellen does a lot of compassionate work. But the difference between me and her is that when we both put on a shirt that says, I am a dreamer, and everyone knows that shirt that went out, went viral, and everyone started wearing that shirt, celebrities alike, and the entire nation went on this almost compassionate tour, how dreamers deserve to be in this country. But the difference between me and Ellen is that when Ellen takes off the shirt, she is Ellen, but I'm still undocumented. The next one is join an immigrant advocacy group in your area and support the agencies doing critical work. There's no need to reinvent the wheel here, everyone. There's organizations right now that are on the ground, on the border, that are helping out directly impacted people like myself, like Priyana. No need to start a whole nonprofit. And I don't mean to dissuade you from starting a nonprofit or an immigrants advocacy group's nonprofit, is I want you to look around your area and identify, where can I give my time? I have technical writing skills. I'm an attorney. I can give my time. I am really good at training. I am really good at public speaking. I am really good at social media. I'm really good at communications. How can you use that skill to ensure that the lives of immigrant people who don't have support are taken care of? How can you support the work of the organizations in your area and throughout the nation that are already on the ground doing the hard work? Because one of the things we have to recognize as volunteers is we can clock in, clock out for 4 hours. Many people don't have that luxury. And so identify the organizations in your area, be a part of your community, have strong ties to your community, and know these people by name. You should know the executive director of the immigrant advocacy group by first name. You should know them. You should tell them, can I text you? Where do you need me? How can I serve? And be a part of that community. The next piece for me is demand for just and immigration policies from your elected officials. I want you to make my struggle a part of your struggle. When we're talking about phone banking, I want you to call all your representatives and I want you to pester them. I want you to email them. I want you to do everything that you can to ensure that your voice is being heard and that you're telling them, I did not vote for you so that you could do this. But it's beyond that too as well, is I want you to recognize that, like I mentioned, I don't have the luxury of taking off the I am a dreamer shirt. It's on me permanently until the United States decides to pass an immigration reform. And so understand that when you get to go home and you get to watch Netflix and you get to be with your friends and you get to travel the world, that many of us don't have the passport to do that. Many of us don't have the means of enjoying life the way that you can. And so make our struggle a part of your struggle. And I'm almost done here, y'all. Be ready to throw it down with us, not for us. What do I mean by that? I know this presentation, I referred it beyond the protest, but when we do get ready to protest, I want y'all to be ready. I want y'all to say, how can I support? I want y'all to know that we as directly impacted people will lead this effort. We don't need you to lead. We got you. Just here, throw in a yellow vest and help us direct traffic. Oh, you want to help with logistics? Perfect. Join the logistics team over here. Oh, perfect. You want to do something else? Let us lead and learn how to follow. Because when we put together actions. Like I mentioned in the first point, directly impacted people need to be the ones that are doing the work. And we need to support in every way we can. Know the truth about the green monster, US Customs and Border Patrol, and their devastating human impacts. For a lot of us, thinking about this is foreign. It might not seem something that we know about, but for those who have been directly impacted by ICE, they have not only shown numerous examples of inhumane and unlawful tactics, but they also terrorize our communities. And when I say that ICE terrorizes my community, that's another piece. I want you to listen to understand rather than listen to respond, because if you don't agree with that, I want you to go look at the examples that have happened in the United States, and look at what has transpired and how this issue of immigration changes. Because let me tell you something, if it was Canadian white babies that were being caged, we would be more outraged than ever before. And I know I just made some folks feel uncomfortable, but that's the whole point. That's the whole point of this conversation, is for us to be uncomfortable. And if we can't say the word white people, if we can't say the word racism, if we can't say the word prejudice, then why are we here? And so we have to understand that we, as a nation, allowed brown children to be caged in 2020. We allowed that to happen. It had happened under our watch, after we said no longer, after we said we would no longer do it, after doing it to the Japanese during the internment camps. We said no longer, but we did it after doing it to the indigenous people of Hawaii, and we robbed them of their culture. We did it. It happened under our watch, and we have to be better than that. And the last piece I want to end on is dismantling white supremacy, an action step for everyone, anyone, and all. Dismantling white supremacy. And why is that important? Because when we don't dismantle white supremacy, we get the deadliest attack on Latinos in US history that took place August 3rd, 2019, El Paso, Texas. A gunman, terrorist came in and was targeting people that looked like me. And he took the lives of over 20 people. And so I want to end this piece of my presentation by reading the names of the 22 victims killed in that attack. Because that terrorist that killed those 22 lives drew language and called us and said that we were invading. And that's why it's so important to recognize the language that we use. And so I'm going to say the names of the individuals who were killed in that terrorist attack. And I want to leave 22 seconds of silence as well. Jordan Achondo, Andre Anchondo, Arturo Benavides, Javier Rodriguez, Sara Esther Regalado Muriel, Adolfo Cerros Hernández, Gloria Irma Márquez, María Eugenia Legarate Roth, Iván Manzano, Juan de Dios Velázquez Chairez, David Johnson, Leonardo Campos Jr., Maribel Campos, Angelina Silva Englisbe, María Flores, Raúl Flores, Jorge Calvillo García, Alexander Gerard Hoffman, Luis Alfonso Juárez, Elsa Mendoza de la Mora, Margie Record, and Teresa Sánchez. Thank you, everyone, for giving me the space. I'm going to give it back to you, Tahil.
Rico, you've energized this room in a lot of different ways. First and foremost, by saying their names, we say presente, reminding us that they're in here with us in spirit and that their memories forever remain a blessing in the work that we do for justice. You've mentioned a lot of important, valuable things that make an impact in the way that people can really tap into the space of doing justice for immigrant communities. And I'm really grateful for what you and other young people are doing on the ground in Nevada, and most importantly, how you contribute to this larger movement for justice in North America. I have so many questions. Sometimes I kind of wonder where I should even start, honestly, because the personal story that Priyana brings to this, the personal story you bring into this, Rico, impacts the way that we sort of start our, thoughts about even doing this work. And the first question I kind of asked is, what moved you from being scared, being concerned, being a part of the communities impacted by legislation, by these movements, and being a part of the front lines of doing this work on the ground? Priyana, for example, your program at Miami University is something that everyone on this call would love to hear about, where you, along with your story, share the story of other immigrant experiences. And Rico, with the work that you're doing in advocacy and for the calls of action that you brought into this space, there's no doubt that anyone that's coming into this as an ally, as someone who's directly impacted, or as someone who may sit in between, they want to start making their first steps. But sometimes it's the fear and the concern that overwhelms them. So where do you start? Whichever, Priyana, if you'd like to start, would love to hear about your program and what it took for you to take those first steps.
For me, I feel like I'm personally a person who analyzes stuff for a long time before actually doing something on it. So I started my web series during last summer, but before that, I actually, as I said, I just came here to study and play. But then it was like, it's just not, it's just not that much, because first, the biggest thing is that I'm not an American. That's the starting part. When you're not like a permanent resident, or, a naturalized person here, or born here, it's just your life is just different. I got to know about it when I, for example, applied for internships or applied for jobs, and I got to know that, oh, I cannot work off campus, or just cannot teach tennis lessons like my friends do and earn extra money, because my visa just doesn't allow that. So those things just piled up. I started working on campus from my first semester because I had to support myself like that. So those things piled up, and I knew that, more taxes were cut from our income as international students than domestic students. So that was another thing I got to know from everything I could see. And, you know, so probably 2 3 years of just analyzing things like, how is my life different from a person who might just be sitting beside me? So those things piled up, and I started looking for internship around Oxford itself, because traveling somewhere else wasn't possible as I don't have a car here. And if I wanted to travel somewhere else, it's just money again, or bus fare, whatever. So I was lucky to get an internship with the Interfaith Center. And then the program director there, Geneva, who's actually with us on the call, she actually helped me, just let me do my thing. That's what, when I used to talk to her about, I feel like we could do something which focuses on immigrant voices. And I have a lot of friends and a lot of people I know that they would love to do work like that. So that's how it started. That's how I actually got into it. And then I volunteered with the League of Women Voters here, for at the farmers market here, registering people to vote. Because one thing I tell people, that I cannot vote, but your vote will decide my future. And so many people like me So you have to make sure you vote and you use your right, because it'll decide so many futures that you cannot even think about. So that's what led me to be more active in this kind of topics and situations.
You're on mute, Tahil.
Thank you. I have to say, you know, it does take a lot of that energy to see, you know, sometimes how you're directly impacted in the way that you're doing this work. My parents came to the United States from India in the late 80s, and they were a part of the amnesty program to be able to receive permanent residence. But even they've reflected to me a number of times that just because they were able to get a green card and my mother was able to get citizenship, it didn't change the way that people viewed them. It didn't really change the way people built opinions and prejudices and behaviors towards them, to a point where they would be roaming around on the street and people would intentionally avoid sharing the sidewalk with them. Granted, in a pre-pandemic situation, years before these topics were of social distancing were a thing, I would say a lot of immigrant communities have had the experience of social distancing from people who fear us, who have ignorance about us, who have misconceptions about us. And for myself as a first generation Indian American, I I didn't face even an iota of comparison to many other things that people went through. But it took the step of solidarity, a responsible solidarity that said, I don't need to experience it to help uplift communities and fight for them. And that's the essence of what we're trying to establish in a space here. Rico, if you'd like to share anything.
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting question for me because when I think about how did you get started or why you got started, I had difficulties understanding what my role was in this ecosystem of social justice. And what I was able to form as I got older was that social justice to me is almost like a highway. And we all have our separate lanes and how we interact with that highway. So because I'm a community organizer, because I'm an activist, that doesn't mean that everyone should go in that one lane and try to be a community organizer and an activist, because resistance is not a one lane highway. For me, resistance, and maybe your lane is protesting, maybe your lane is organizing, maybe your lane is counseling, maybe your lane is activism, maybe your lane is entrepreneurship, and you're trying to teach entrepreneurship to an underrepresented community. That could be it. Maybe your lane is just surviving for the day, because we'd rather have you tomorrow than trying to fit into a lane that perhaps you don't fit in. And so I like to credit, I believe her name is Deepa Iyer. So she created the framework, which is like the social change ecosystem map, and talked about how technically there's so many different roles within social justice that you could play, such as a storyteller like Priyana. Then you have healers, experimenters, frontline responders, visionaries, disruptors who are on the ground laying in front of a bus, protecting people from being deported. Just because you don't fit within one lane doesn't mean you don't have a lane. Find out what you're good at, attribute that to the social justice movement, and go to work. And I'll make sure to link that that document that I credited here in a bit into the chat.
Rico, that's fantastic. That's absolutely right. We're trying to, remind people that they have a piece in this. Whatever that piece looks like is up to them. We can be fundraisers, we can be organizers, we can be people behind the scenes, we can be people on the front lines. But each of us has an important role to play in this, and we can't forget that. Oftentimes when we're trying to get people to start this work, they even feel concerned that they have to prioritize a specific kind of justice work every single time they get involved. You don't have to do that. What we're asking you to do is to build a better network of solidarity, even if you're prioritizing a different kind of justice work from the one that comes in front of you, because that's the difference of doing interconnected justice. You can specialize in the justice work you like doing, while at the same time being a fantastic support to people in other movements for justice. That's the value of what we're trying to bring in this space today. And, you know, it becomes really important when we think about this work of storytelling in particular. You both have shared some really compelling things when it comes to understanding how systems impact people, how you aren't just statistics, you aren't just numbers. You're individuals with lives and families, and you are people who want stable livings like anyone else. You want a good future for yourself and your family. At times when we have to deal with a lot of misinformation, a lot of polarity in terms of politics, what helps you tell your story in a way that not only drives people emotionally, but makes them realize how they can really connect better with the truth of a system or a piece of legislation or a reality that's on the ground that they may not see in front of them? I'll let either of you answer as you feel compelled.
I can go first, I guess. Huh. So, what I believe in the power of storytelling, personal storytelling. Um, it's because you don't have to frame anything. It's your experience and it's just valid. And you don't know how many people you will be empowering because you don't know what you say might be relatable to someone else in some corner of this world. And I believe in that power because especially I grew up with people who never looked like me on TV. So that was a gap that I like to fill up. Whatever politically, if something happens, I what I try to do is I try to question people, or I also believe in the power of empathy. Like, what if you were there in that situation? What if it was you? That's the thing. So, as we said, we just see one side of the coin. Sometimes we don't see the other. So, what if you were on the other side of the coin? What if you were the person who was in F1 status and the administration said that you will have to vacate the country in 10 days if your classes are to go online, and your friend has a citizenship of the country and can just sit down without doing anything? How would you feel if you were that person? So whatever feeling you will feel, a similar feeling has been felt by so many people in the immigrant community, migrant community, refugees, asylum seekers. It's just a thing about uncertainty. When is, like, the ticking bomb that I'm talking about, the time bomb that is put on our backs every time we enter a country. 4 years. Some people don't even get it. Some people get it, but it's snatched away because of some stuff. So that's what I try to question people. That's it. I don't put an explanation in because I need to know what you actually think, why you think it. But then questioning is probably one of the things I do all the time.
Absolutely. You always got to ask the questions. And I think a lot of times what happens is when you pose a story to people that have assumptions around you that want to build you into these different compartments in their mind, you actually deconstruct those compartments completely. Because oftentimes your personal experience sits as an outlier for them, and they oftentimes don't know what to do with that information, which hopefully plants a seed of learning and saying, oh, maybe I have this wrong. Maybe I need to change my perspectives. Maybe I need to dig deeper and see what I haven't been told so that I can have a better understanding and be a part of the change, be a part of the reform. And I think storytelling is 100% the way to do it. It drives the emotional, it brings the personal, and it brings the practical into the conversation that oftentimes gets left out when you just talk about facts and statistics and the larger numbers of what might be happening. Rico, did you want to add?
Yeah, as soon as you said that asked that question, I thought about right out the gate. When I was 14 years old, I attended my first protest, and imagine, I can't imagine how many of you, 14 years old were fighting for your rights. But I was 14 years old. I was attending an immigration protest in my community, and it was in regards to the United States government deporting my community and people that looked like me. And so I was 14 years old, and I remember the protest actually started out of high school. So high school students began leaving their high schools and then going and joining the protest in one central location. And as the protest was going, I actually passed by my house, and my mother was in the corner. And something in that moment for me really put things into overdrive. And I guess I just got to explain to you, my mother, 4'11", devout Catholic. This woman can pray the heavens down, and she has a sandal in her hands, and it's over, right? But in that moment, my mom, for some reason, knew that I was going to pass by the house in that corner, and I thought she was going to give me the embarrass me in front of my friends and tell me what was I doing. And I thought she was going to yell from the top of her lungs and tell me, get inside. But she did the opposite. She handed me a cold water bottle, and she said, go finish what I couldn't. And that was it. And for me, I've always looked at this entire movement as every single effort I do, I am recognizing that change won't come, may not come within my lifetime, but it will come within my lifeline. And so that is how I see this movement of interconnected justice. Because if I can have this recording live forever, my children can see me, and they can see the way in which I operate and go about my day, every single life, treating people with compassion, then I know that in my lifeline, justice will prevail.
Man, I just want to sit with that for a minute. That hit the heart. Um, excuse me. Oh, my word. That is one of the best lines I've heard in a very long time. It may not be a part of my lifetime, but it should be a part of my lifeline. Oof. Um, oh my goodness, thank you. That says so much about the commitment, the dedication, the passion, for not just helping yourself, but for helping the world. And I think it just says so much about the opportunities that we all have to make our lifeline a part of this experience. And I just keep wanting to share so much gratitude with each of you for giving us the time, for sharing your stories, for making us realize that this commitment is more than just a one-day thing. It's a part of everything that we can do. So I really want to share so much gratitude for that. For all of you that are here right now, I know a lot of you are processing the amazing things that Priyana and Rico have said. So I want to give this time to invite folks to type any questions that they might have here on the chat or on our Facebook Live right now. And, make the space yours to ask them some questions. I actually already have a question here for Rico. This is from Alice from the California Interfaith Power and Light, which is a CC, a part of URI North America. Alice asks, what were some of the social circumstances of why Anytown Las Vegas was started? Does it still serve the same purpose in today's world? She loves the idea of mentioning contact training And in places like Los Angeles, it's kind of expected that enlightened, diverse folks already know one another, but that's not actually necessarily true. Do you know of orgs like Anytown active in other large urban areas like Los Angeles, or even in smaller areas that, make a name for themselves in the work that they do?
Yeah, so one of the reasons why Anytown was created was, in fact, we have to go back to the 1930s and 40s during the civil rights movement. It rose like a phoenix from that era, and each city essentially adopted its own Anytown program. And the overall premise was to ensure that people of different faiths and backgrounds and ethnicities understood each other and were able to dialogue with one another. Now, how Anytown shows up in today's world is you'll see the Anytown spirit still lives on, but yet the curriculum is different. And the reason why I think this new approach is works well is because what's happening in Anytown, Alabama are not the same things that are happening in Anytown, Las Vegas. And so when we think about social justice issues, it can't be a one glove fits all approach. It has to be very directed, specific, and has to be very grassroots to that place, right? So while let's say, and I'll just use like an example of Anytown, Texas, right? I'm not sure if they have one, but let's say they're dealing with issues that are affecting a specific type of students, population, or an issue. We're in Las Vegas. We're really focused on a lot of interfaith work. We're focused on ensuring that people from different backgrounds get to come and experience not only what it means to have a friend who is Muslim, but they also get to make those relationships afterwards. And so we look at this from a racial lens, a social justice lens, an interfaith lens, and now we're going into the policy end where we want young people to make policy changes, whereas different organizations may not be there yet. And so that's the way in which we operate. And then as far as any organizations in Los Angeles that are doing similar work to Anytown, yes, I'm thinking, I can't think off the top of my head of one, but I know there's one that is doing some justice work out there. If you want, Tahil, I can send that person an email or a Facebook message if it came through Facebook, because I want to make sure I give them the right information.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll be more than happy to share that. And as a part of answering that question, Alice, there are a couple of national organizations that are trying to approach this work through metropolitan cities and smaller areas. One in particular is Faith in Action. They're a national interfaith advocacy organization that focuses on all sorts of different topics, one of them being immigration. And they have their LA chapter, which is LA Voice. They also have a state chapter known as Pico, California. And they're also based in states like Texas, New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and several others. So if you'd like me to share that information, I'd be more than happy to. I'll start off with actually putting that link in the chat for everyone to look at as well, if I know how to do this properly. Great. This next question comes from Felipe, for either of you or both of you to answer. How do I approach local movements advocating for immigrant justice?
I can go. Okay. So a lot of local movements and organizations, they have Instagram pages, Facebook pages, and they're pretty active on it. So you can just start off by messaging them about, when do you meet, what are you doing, what are your next programs coming up? Because I'm an introvert myself, and I struggle meeting new people or meeting new organizations. So that's how I start off. And then when they reply with information, and then I make sure I start attending their meetings, actually knowing the officers, whoever run the organizations, meeting people there. And then, by that time you would develop some kind of relationship with someone in the org, and then you can just go on from there. So that's what I do. Yeah,
Great, Priyana. Rico?
Yeah, I would just offer two recommendations here is Instagram can be a very useful tool, especially in the search bar when you go to geotag and then you look under places and people who've like, for example, if you live in Lima, Peru, right, and you're wanting to get into the work of Lima, Peru, go to Instagram and find out all the people that are tagging Lima, Peru, and see if you come up with an organization that is doing some type of work there. Another thing too, was reach out to a local the local university in your area and figure out what are students doing there. Because like I mentioned, young people are doing an amazing amount of work that goes unnoticed. And one of the things that oftentimes is the barrier when it comes to young people doing work is that they don't have marketing budgets to put themselves at the top of the Google search list, right? And so they don't have the means to provide SEO budgets and to ensure that anytime you put in social justice Lima, Peru, their name doesn't always come up. And so contact not only the universities in your area, but also the grassroots organizations that are in your area, because they themselves might have young people that are doing amazing work. I mean, you can think about climate work that is being done throughout the entire world. The only thing that is really preventing them from going big is exposure. And so if you're able to provide that, help with, hey, we'd love to have you on our podcast for this, and then you end up hearing the podcast and you're like, whoa, I've never heard of this group before. What? That right there is so big. And it means a lot to people, a lot too.
Yeah, definitely. One thing that's actually really helped me a lot was actually, using Google productively. So when I was trying to tap into, work that's happening in specific cities, I would go to Google and I would type in the specific kind of justice work and the name of the city that I was looking for. And that what that often does is it actually brings up specific organizations in my community, in that community, that actually are already doing the work. It'll take you to their website and to the projects that they might be working on, or it might show you if they have a physical location that you can one day visit in person when things are safer so that you can meet with people in person. And hopefully once you go to their website, they have either contact forms or ways of contacting them through email that you should totally tap into, because it's really as easy as doing the search that we can on our phones. I mean, we can literally access all of these organizations at the push of a button. So let's make sure that we can do that. If any others have questions, I'll invite them to also use the reaction button at the bottom of their screen. There is one that looks like you're raising your hand, or actually you can stick up your thumb up if you'd like to ask a question, and I can unmute you if that makes it easier for anyone. So if no one else has any questions right now, Rico, I know you shared an extended, really significant list of, some actions that people can be doing. Priyana, I don't know if you would like to share any actions as well that you feel would be helpful in getting people involved or making sure that people know that they can take their first steps. Priyana, can you hear me?
oh yeah, for sure. I thought I was just, yeah, I was confused about that. But um so action steps, I feel like first start with analyzing things, what's actually around happening around you, because you have to know what's happening around you to know what is happening on a national or an international stage. So go from a local perspective, see what's happening in your city, or the village you live in or the town you live in. Then start, for example, you heard about a movement which went in your city. Google about it. You'll get more information from the news and everything. And also compare news sources. That's how you get more information on what's actually happening, because there's no common base for the media that we live in or that we take in. You just have to compare a lot of news sources to actually get to the point that they're trying to prove. So start from local and then see, if anything which relates to that is happening on a national or international stage. Because, for example, there's a lot of the Black Lives Matter movement, right? The Black Lives Matter movement, it's an international movement, but it starts from the local side. What's actually happening, for example, in Oxford, Ohio? What is happening in Ohio? What is happening in the US? What are other countries doing for that movement? And start comparing it, and then you'll know about it. Try to contact the organizations which might be around where you live, which we were talking about. That does a lot, because as you said, that marketing also takes a lot of money, and then a lot of organizations just don't have those funding because it's just expensive. So start by doing that. Start by just knowing things around you, I guess. That's how you know what's actually happening, because you will be surprised so much stuff is going on around you and you just don't know. So that, just be aware of it, and then after being aware and knowledgeable about it, then only take action, because just don't know and take action. Know, analyze, then take action. That's
Thank you for sharing that, Priyana. I totally agree. When you're trying to look up news sources, it's not just about if it fits your opinion or not. It's all about if it's true or not. And it really requires us to create a more complex approach in making sure we understand why bias plays a role that it does in affecting our understanding of immigrant communities, just as it does the news source itself. So please make sure to check out any media bias charts. Make sure to check fact-checking organizations like Politico that are really actively making sure that we get accurate information and not just information that can fit perfectly into our echo chamber. I think that's really important. One thing that I think is important also in this process is see what the needs of your community are when starting this work. You have a lot of diverse community members in your spaces that could be facing a number of different challenges. Some of them may be very legal. Some of them might be just retaining necessities. Some of them just might need a voice in a space that they don't often get to speak. And some of them are fighting for their life to exist and thrive here in North America. See what those needs are before you take those first steps, because the better you have a context of where you're at, the better you can actually help start doing the work to make a positive impact. Um, and so with that in mind, we're just about wrapping up, and I am again so thankful to both of you, Priyana and Rico, for saying yes to speaking in this space. I think you've made a lot of people think, you've made a lot of people emotional for sure, and you've made a significant impact in the work for justice. And I just want to share that gratitude. I want to share gratitude with everyone in this space. For taking part and for being a part of the conversation, whether silently or more actively engaged. Be on the lookout, please, for a recording of this that we'll be sharing with people, as well as a feedback form that you should be getting tomorrow. And please keep coming to these sessions. We're looking for more people to help us talk about important issues. And we already have 2 events coming up that I'll be sharing more events about tomorrow. Including an event on dialogue as justice. And for Earth Day, we will be focusing on environmental justice. So we're looking forward to having all of you and 1 or 2 of your friends to join and being a part of the conversation. So with that, thank you all so much for coming. We appreciate you, and please go out into the world doing the good that you do. Thank you so, so much.